Welcome to Amplify, the personal brand business show. Today on the show, Bob is speaking with Robbie Swale.
If I have a dear friend who's starting a coaching business, coaching shape business, that's the place that I would say, first, send 50 invitations to a coaching session. You'll learn an enormous amount about yourself. And actually, if you have an invitation practice, then you're going to be coaching people. So you have a coaching practice. And if you're coaching people, you almost can't help but have some people say, how much does it cost to work with you? And how do I do that? And then we're in the game.
Hi there and welcome back to the Personal Brand Business Show. My name is Bob Gentle and every week I speak to incredible people who share their secrets to building, marketing and monetizing their expertise and the mindset you need for your business to grow and thrive. If you're new to the show, then while you still have your device in your hand, take a second to subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode. So recently I had a guest on talking about coaching shaped businesses. And I loved that way of describing the kind of thing a lot of people do in their business. And I'm delighted to welcome back the perfectly shaped coach, Robbie Swale. Robbie, welcome to the show.
I don't think anybody's ever described me as perfectly shaped before, but it's great to be back, Bob.
So when I say the perfectly shaped coach, I mean this metaphorically. Obviously, you're a very handsome chap with a haircut of champions.
That's absolutely right.
But you are a coach in the classic sense, which I love. I speak to lots of people people like me, where there's an aspect of coaching to what they do. But I'm almost like a tennis coach. So I'll help you with a particular game. Whereas you're a coach that works with a lot of coaches and you're really working in the classical coaching sense in a lot of ways. But maybe, obviously this is interpretation from the world of Bob Gentle, but maybe if you take a second to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what it is you actually do, rather than my ham-fisted description of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's true. There's a thing that we now call coaching, which, the way I think about it in lots of different ways, but the way this moment it comes up is, really it's a set of structures, a set of practices that help people do their best thinking. And one of the great things about that and the joyful things is that those skills can be applied in many, many different ways. And you're absolutely right. There are people who do, like most people who do some form of coaching, do some form of those structures. And then sometimes there's a whole set of expertise that they bring as well. And in my business, there are kind of two parts to it. So where I found that my particular way of coaching comes to life is really in two spheres. So one is with leaders and entrepreneurs, people running teams usually who have all the kind of messiness and choppy waters of working with a whole bunch of people, but they also have some ambition that they're working towards, some performance goals or change that they're creating in their business or organization or outside. So I have the leadership part of my business. And then, like you say, I love the craft of coaching. I think it has so much to offer, particularly because if you think about the leaders, people are dealing with more and more complex environments and roles, and coaching has something to offer in the face of increasing complexity. So because I love the craft of coaching, I also have a part of my business, like you say, which supports other coaches in a whole bunch of different ways. And we're probably going to get into a bit of both of those sides of the business this time. But that's not the whole of my business, because I've been on the show before and we talked then about kind of one of my, I don't know what you'd call it, like one of the things that shows up wherever I'm working, which is this kind of this way that we often get trapped in inaction around the things that we are most called to do and create and make happen. So these things that we've wanted to do for a long time and haven't done. And I have a series of books called The 12-Minute Method. And that comes into all of my work, the kind of questions of productivity, the questions of procrastination. How do we get through that? And so people can go back to that other conversation to get in detail about that, I guess.
And it is worth going back to listen to that. Just search Robbie Swale. Is super easy to find. And at the risk of falling into a conversation about productivity, the reason I love the 12-minute method concept is I have days where I feel unproductive and then days when I feel super productive. For me, yesterday was a little bit like that. Yesterday, get this, I outlined a virtual summit. I outlined a book. I organized an in-person event. I did something else ridiculous as well. I can't remember what it was, but an outrageously productive day on top of back-to-back client calls. And I'm put in mind of, the day that your homework is due in, I was that kid that if I did do homework, it was getting done in the last possible second. And you can get an amazing amount done. And similarly, the 3 days before you're about to go on holiday, suddenly you can get 3 months worth of work done. And the 12-minute method is essentially a method of bringing that to bear, maybe not on a daily basis, but certainly as part of your productivity practice. So I love it, and I recommend anybody go and look it up.
Yeah, and you can find that kind of headlines on my website and that kind of thing. But and obviously the books bring a little more life to it. But yeah, it reminds me, Bob, of there's a guy called Douglas Hofstadter, and he has some great books. They're like kind of hard work. I found them because he's a mathematician as well as a kind of, I don't know, psychologist, or his books contain all of that stuff. And someone recommended one to me once because I have a maths undergrad degree. That's what I studied at university. And they thought, maybe you'll get the maths bit. And it turned out, no. But he coined a thing which he calls Hofstadter's law, which is the task will always expand to fill the time available, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law, which is funny. So there's basically nothing you can do about that. And the new thought that I just had about that from what you said is the thing about the 12-minute method is that it plays that the other way. So normally what happens is, the homework thing or the revision for exams thing is like, you set out with all the time in the world, but then the actual revision, even though you only end up doing, 4 hours of revision for a subject, it all happens in the last 4 hours. And it looks like, because you spent ages designing your revision timetable and color coding things and that kind of thing, it happens in the last possible minute. And the 12-minute method plays the other way. It says, well, look, what if I only had, and my practice was originally writing. That's the place that it was cut. What if I only had 12 minutes to write an article? And that was the exact time I gave myself, plus a bit of proofreading. And it's great because you often get a lot more done in 12 minutes of focus than you would think possible. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you get more than enough done in that amount of time, even though you originally would plan to spend 4 hours writing something. It turns out that a 500-word draft written in 12 minutes is actually not easily good enough.
So I would like to use that as a wonderful segue into talking about the Coaching Business Flywheel, because a lot of the people I work with resist certain activities. They resist content creation. The 12-minute method's brilliant for that. I use it. I always give myself a constraint when I create any piece of content because I know the task will grow to fill whatever space I give it. So 10 or 12 minutes is a great constraint. You can achieve a lot in that. The other activity a lot of people resist is sales, relationship building, networking. And when I discovered the Coaching Business Flywheel on your website, it was artful. So for the listener, can you maybe just describe what the genesis of that was, where it came from, what it is, and how people in a coaching-shaped business can use processes like those alongside a constraint to be a bit more consistent with bringing the business into their life?
Yeah. So the origin of it really was that I heard Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, talking about the concept of the flywheel. And I actually can't remember, I should check this, whether it was a thing that he'd created or he just observed as he looked at businesses which went from good to great, which is essentially the piece of work that he did. And the idea is basically that you can look at your business to find a virtuous cycle that essentially, if you put energy into it, it will keep paying you back over time, and the business will gather momentum. And that's what a flywheel is. If you're in weaving or you're in engineering, it's basically a device that stores momentum for use in the future. So I quoted a bit from Good to Great so there's a free ebook called An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel that people can get at thecoachesjourney.com. And in there, I quote an Amazon one because most people are familiar with Amazon. So you can kind of look at that and get a sense of what this could look like. And of course, the idea of this virtuous cycle, which kind of, if you do enough of one thing, you almost can't help but have the next thing happen, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And then somewhere in there is more clients, more customers. Like the idea of that, I got super excited. I was like, well, what's the flywheel for my business? And I got to say, like, the concept of the flywheel is a really valuable tool in and of itself. Even if all people take from this conversation is a flywheel is a thing you can think about for your business or your clients, then you're going to be in a great space of service. And I've used it with leadership clients, for example, on everything from their kind of personal energy to, their businesses. So I got really interested. What is the flywheel for my business? straight away. I think pretty much that day, having listened to Collins talking about that. And I realized that actually I knew a flywheel for a coaching shaped business. And that was from the very influential book called The Prosperous Coach, which I'd really used to build my coaching business when I was starting out. I still use it now. Essentially in there is what the authors Litvin and Chandler call a set of lead indicators, i.e. these are things that if you do them, they're pretty much completely in your control. And if you do them, having clients and making money from your business is downstream of that. So you do enough of these things, you almost can't help but have more clients.
Yeah.
And we get a bit obsessed usually in a business with a lagging indicator like money or signed up clients, but that comes after all the action that puts clients in your business. And going back to resistance, what I think is really amazing about what they did in that book, and it isn't the whole of that book. So I think some people miss this in The Prosperous Coach, how important those indicators are. But because I did some work with Rich Litvin, I was part of some of his group programs, I went to some of his events, I got this really drilled into me. I really saw how important focusing on the right things within our control in our business can be for actually having the outcomes we want. And these are often things, like you say, that people resist. And in The Prosperous Coach, they point to those things in almost the most direct way possible that you can do them. And we could talk a bit about how they do that in a minute, if that's useful. Then I looked at this and I thought I'd seen something else in The Prosperous Coach, like turning those ideas into a flywheel. And then I realized I was wrong, because I thought what I'd seen was that also those things that are in the Prosperous Coach approach were also things that every coach had to do. I.e., it appealed, in fact, to the part of me that studies maths, of some kind of dual equivalence, where you not only get a virtuous cycle that continually grows your business if you do the right things, but you also have a thing which is everything that every coach has to do. And if you don't do any of these things, you can't have a business. And then I proved myself wrong by exception, because I was teaching this at a workshop, and I looked at one of my clients who was there, and I realized I hadn't been through the Prosperous Coach approach with him. He'd been a client that had been created in my business in a different way. And so then I set out to think, okay, can I do that thing that I thought I'd found, which is find a flywheel for coaching-shaped businesses, which also tells us the only things that people who have a sustainable coaching-shaped business have to do. And that, I think, is the coaching business flywheel. Although you can hear, I tend to iterate publicly. And so it's possible that in this conversation or another one soon, I'm actually teaching it in a workshop tomorrow as we record this. It's possible that I'll find another flaw in it and need to tweak it again. But what's interesting is that gives us really actionable stuff, but also that it was interesting. It was only when I realized that I had done that I'd seen something new, that I was like, okay, now is the time to really get this model out into the world. Yeah. And so again, it's like, what's the actual contribution here? Oh, maybe it's that there's something here which tells a real truth about coaching shaped businesses.
I think it does. And I think any framework is simply a crystallization, a snapshot in time of something that's quite dynamic a lot of the time. Yeah. An analogy I came across recently was, it's a little bit like an artist's palette. There's lots of colors. You know what you can paint with this, but the artist brings the dynamism to it. And that's the difference between having a framework and working with a framework alongside somebody who knows how to use it. So you as an artist bring something to the coaching business flywheel that I can't necessarily immediately see. It's exactly the same with the kind of frameworks that I use. They are just a snapshot of one potential implementation.
Yeah, and in each one, there's so much texture. And I think one of the things that was interesting to me, so I haven't really said this, but basically because I wrote an article about how I built my coaching business, which contains the flywheel in it and the Prosperous Coach and all those kinds of things. Like when I moved from, starting my training to having a full-time business doing this, it took me just under a couple of years. And I wrote an article when I got to that point. People really liked it. And then I've ended up having conversations with other people with this kind of business and working with coaches to help them essentially apply the flywheel, even though we didn't always call it that, since roughly 2017, 2018. So when the flywheel crystallized in front of me, it was great because then I'm able to look at all that work, test it against that knowledge. I also have a podcast, which we've been running for about 5 years, called The Coach's Journey. And again, I get to look at it and I can't see yet where that model, albeit it is a exactly, it's like a snapshot. It's a framework. It's flawed because it's never going to hold the texture of reality, but it also does give us some real guidance on, okay, if we do enough of these things, enough of the actual things that lead to sales, then we can be pretty confident that in the end, clients and money follow.
So to shortcut for the listener, they're probably getting aggravated at this point, thinking, what is this coaching?
What is it? Yeah.
Anybody that's interested, this is available for free on Robbie's website. Just go and download it. If you identify as a coach, you'll get a lot of value from this. Everybody will probably get something slightly different. But
yeah, exactly. And for this conversation, having it in front of you, if you're not driving, not running, could be a really useful thing to do to kind of see it.
So people have paused. They've gone away and got it. They've come back. For the listener who has been too lazy to do all of that, can you maybe just break it down a little bit? What are the things that coaching-shaped businesses have to do if they want to see any kind of business?
Yeah, exactly. So I think these are both, you can't have a sustainable business without these things. And if you do enough of each of them, you almost can't help but have more of the clients you want. So you can imagine this, if you're listening, as a kind of clock face wheel. And at the top, in my one, because it does feel like the natural start of the flywheel, is you have to connect with people. If you never connect with any people, I don't think it's possible for you to have a coaching shaped business. But if you connect with enough people, you almost can't help but have a coaching shaped business. And like you've already alluded to, like, connect with people is a deep well that we could mine for a full episode of this show, right? And in fact, you've probably done that, Bob, loads of times in different ways on the show. I know you have. And so people can kind of find all the ways to do that and more in your work for sure. So connect with people. And particularly, if you connect with enough people, you almost can't help but offer opportunities for people to experience you more. So that's the next thing on the flywheel for a business like this, I think. If you never have any opportunities for people to experience you more, very hard to have any clients. And that can look really different. It can look like this podcast, which is people experiencing you and me more. It can look like me doing the kind of direct prosperous coach thing, which might be reaching out to somebody and saying, I'd love to coach you for an hour or two. Like, just have an experience, see what it's like. And if you do those things, if you offer enough opportunities for people to experience you more, you almost can't help but help people to create insight. And I think, again, if you don't do that at some stage in the process, no one's going to pay you any money for work like I do or work like you do. And pretty much everybody who does any type of coaching, even if you are literally a tennis coach, if you're not helping people see how they play the game differently, they're not going to hire you, or at least they're not going to hire you again. So, but if you help people create insight enough, you almost can't help but tell people how you work, how much it costs, and how to pay you. And that's the next thing on the flywheel. You have to do that. If you never do it, basically, you can't have a business, not if you need money. And even if you don't need money from your business and you're measuring success and payment in a different way, if you never tell people that, they can't hire you in a deeper way. If you do that enough, you almost can't help but work with clients. Like, a crucial thing I learned from Rich Litvin, if you make enough proposals, like, that's actually the thing to measure. If you want more money in your business, it's the closest to having money step is tell more people how you work, how much it costs, how to pay you. If you do that enough, you almost can't help but work with more clients. And if you work with more clients, you almost can't help but be connected to new people as long as you're doing good work, because there will be word of mouth, there will be referral. And again, a thing I learned from the Prosperous Coach, really, although I knew, no, that's not quite true. I'd learned this from interviewing other people who did my kind of work, just meeting them for coffee. It became apparent to me that in the end, they'd all reached a place where they were the work they'd done was leading to enough referrals to be the work they're doing now. And they all had different ways of making that happen. And then the Prosperous Coach, Litvin and Chandler, they really labor that in that book. That book is really a part of it, of what it's about, which was super helpful to me and appeals to the same part of me that wrote the 12-Minute Method books, is stop doing things that aren't on their version of the flywheel, essentially, and start doing that. Be really conscious about what you're doing. And that's for sure really helped me. So there we go. There's some headline version of it. But again, like you say, or like I was saying, like we were saying, each of these stages a lot of time and texture can be spent on. I love doing that in the work that I do with coaches. And in fact, the arrows between each one. So if you can imagine that wheel, it has an arrow leading from one to the other. In a way, the action you take to control, like the measurable thing, if you were going to measure stuff, would be how many people do I connect with? But one of the crucial things is, how do I make sure that those connections lead to people being offered opportunities to experience me more. And that is essentially the arrow at each stage of the flywheel. So there's a lot of places to think about and reflect on and take different actions with this.
I think what's really interesting is in isolation, all of that makes logical sense. However, when you take a human being into account, suddenly all logic goes out the window. So what you described there, I've also read and had my business and sales process in particular transformed by the prosperous coach. But it's a difficult thing to actually explain to people because they hear what they want to hear when you try and explain it. So I kind of don't. But what's interesting is this idea of connecting with people. What I guess people here connect with people. They might think that's just clicking a button to connect. Connecting with people is connecting as an individual, as a human being. Have we created a connection? Do we feel that we kind of know each other? Is there dialogue? And this can be really difficult because, as you mentioned, the arrows, what happens after connection? What flows from a relationship is largely directed by how that relationship was established. So how we actually make that connection has a big impact on what subsequently happens. And this is not something I've spent very much time on, but I'm really interested to hear from you. How should people approach, because this is the genesis of everything. What if you can connect with people? You then have a process that you can continue with. So how do you approach this idea of just the first connection?
What comes up is, again, it's that part of me that. So you're absolutely right. Like I loved what you said at the start of that piece of thinking you've just done. Like I had this thought with my group coaching program recently. I was talking about the flywheel, and it's like, in fact, there's a digital product people can buy, which actually has like the actual emails that I send to people to create. To do those invitations, to offer people this A-star experience of me. So what I love about that is I've essentially, I have a woman on the call. She's on some level trusts me about the flywheel. She's got the actual emails. We look at the call. It's like everyone here knows more than 100 people and has sent more than 1,000 typed messages in their life, probably more than 100, more than 10,000, 100,000 maybe. So the only reason to not be sending them is them. So that's what I get really interested in. It's like, as a coach, that's fantastic because really the only thing that I and a client can work with is me and them. And so that's great. If the problem we know is, or the reason they're not in action and not connecting with people is something to do with them, that's great because that's what we can actually do work with. And so when you ask that question, there are kind of two things that come to mind. Mostly what I've seen is that exactly like you say, so either people think that by adding somebody on LinkedIn, they have connected with them for the purposes of this kind of flywheel or their business, and that's just wrong because I get hassled by people on LinkedIn every day, and mostly it turns me off their business. But sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes there's a genuine exchange of messages when someone's added me on LinkedIn, or they tell me that they've listened to me on this show, and we have a little exchange about it and what they took away, and then there's some actual connection. So the first thing is to just reiterate what you said. The second thing is, mostly what I've seen is, if we're really obsessed, this is a funny paradox, if we're really obsessed with the flywheel or building our business while we're doing the things that lead to building our business, it actually is prohibitive to building our business. So just to make that really clear with connection, if I'm connecting with somebody and 99% of my consciousness is focused on this person could one day be a client, it is much less likely that person will become a client. Yeah. So I have a distinction I call, is it soul work or is it goal work? And if you have goal work is like, I want a bigger coaching business or more clients. I have that goal. I'm doing everything just because of that. And soul work is I'm just doing it because it brings me to life. It brings me joy. It brings me meaning. And if we have no goal work, then we end up with no business, probably, because actually you need some element of the entrepreneur or the hunter in what we're doing. But if we're too focused on it, then, and in fact, if we have no goal work, if there's no goal there, we don't bother with the flywheel. So we're not doing the action that leads to business, and we don't have the clients, so we can't make the impact and all that kind of thing. But if we're too in that, then it doesn't actually work as well. So what we have to do is remember the goal and then kind of put it to the back of our mind, be kind of in the connection with somebody, be 2 to 5% aware of that goal. Yeah. And mostly just be in, and this is great for people who have coach-shaped businesses, mostly just be in, really deeply connecting and having a meaningful conversation with somebody about what's most interesting between two people. And the truth is, if you do enough of that, and this is the kind of crucial thing, you almost can't help but offer opportunities for people to experience you more. In almost every connection, especially if you're someone like you or me who's been doing a load of creation, at some point there'll be, do you know, actually, I wrote a blog post about this once, or had this person on the podcast and they said something about this, and then suddenly we're in that. The crucial piece for me when I was first starting out, for example, I kind of had some of that insight already, although I talked about it differently. I realized that for me, one of the crucial things is, can they really count if we've had a meaningful connection and it is plausible that they could contact me again if they wanted to. So, for example, that means they have to have been given a business card. They have to be able to Google me, i.e. know my name. We have to be connected on LinkedIn. If we have no meaningful connection, it doesn't count. But also, if there's no way for them to contact me again, then it's not going to help with the flywheel. So we have to. So the 5% part of me that's on goal work when I'm in the connection is, if this is a meaningful connection, I want to leave it with a way for them to be in touch.
Yeah. What I like about that is you're approaching this connection with an attitude of service. And I was listening to a podcast recently where there was a teacher who had started an online business. She said when she was a teacher, all the kids knew if she had the red hat on, she was to be left alone. She was working with one student who needed help. If she had the blue hat on, then she was all business. Anyone could come and talk to her. And what she's done in her business now is she has red hat time. And in red hat time, she's not thinking commercially. She's thinking generosity, giving value. Then she takes that hat off. She puts the blue one on. She's all business. Where this blends really nicely into the 12-minute method is people need a process for connecting. For 12 minutes a day, we can afford to put that red hat on and we can be all in on giving. We can be giving service. We can be trying to be meaningful for people. And then, as you said, put the blue hat on, go commercial. Then we're thinking about the numbers and the business and the money. The only way to make that connection work, as you've described, is it's about them. It's not about us. We need to be truly of service in order to be beginning those conversations in the right way and to be truly memorable. I did know that you had some scripts for this. I wasn't setting you up for that. But very rarely has somebody had me lean for my credit card quite the way you have. I'm not there yet. But this is the missing link for a lot of people, is this first point of contact, the first push on the flywheel. And it's so important.
Bob, let me just catch something about that. Like, when people are starting out, I actually disagree with what you've just said.
Okay.
Generally in a business, I think you're right, like the first push. But actually, when people are starting out in a coaching-shaped business, they actually have a network already. They have a whole set of connections who are, in some way, have already had that meaningful thing happen. And so actually, if I have a new coach come to me, the place that I take them, and this is what the templates are in that, not to be too much selling that booster pack, but it is an important thing in there. Like, mostly people get really worried about networking when they're starting a coaching shaped business, but actually they don't need to do that because they have a network. They're just probably afraid to reach out to it for a number of reasons, including feeling like they're going to burn bridges, or worrying they're going to embarrass themselves, or knowing people see them in a different way. There's all these kind of fears that people have at that stage. But actually the most direct way then to what they want, which is usually clients, those initial clients, is the network with an offer to experience that coach in some way more. And so that if I have a dear friend who's starting a coaching shaped business, that's the place that I would say, like, first, send 50 invitations to a coaching session. Like, you'll learn an enormous amount about yourself. And actually, if you have an invitation practice, then you're going to be coaching people. So you have a coaching practice. And if you're coaching people, you almost can't help but have some people say, how much does it cost to work with you? And how do I do that? And then we're in the game.
That's the best moment possible. And I would wish for as many people as possible to experience that. I recognize quite a few mindset issues around that outreach. The connection, actually, if you've got a little bit of creativity, it's quite easy. And it just needs to become a disciplined part of your day. The actual offering of the coaching, once you've been doing it for a while, it can be quite straightforward. However, even for me today, I had a guy on a call who runs one of the biggest performance training companies in the world. And I'm pitching myself for a free coaching call. I'm thinking, I can't do this. I can't do this. Me? Him? Are you insane? And we all have this. It doesn't matter if it's offering coaching to your nephew down the street who's just getting his first job or a small local business owner. It's all relative. Imposter syndrome creeps in all the time. What advice would you have for anybody who's trying to crack the nut of offering these coaching calls without overwhelming themselves with, well, what if it goes wrong? All the questions, all the junk that's going to come up.
Yeah. It's really great to point to that. And there's probably a few things we can say. So we can say, look, this is one of those things, it does get easier. So confidence comes after and courage comes first. And people often get confused about that, right? They think they have to feel good in order to do things. What I've discovered is the 12-minute method. I can't remember exactly how much we talked about this last time, but that's been my, in a way, the biggest lesson of my last decade is there are things which feel terrifying. And then you have the courage to do them. And as time grows, your confidence grows and what you're capable of, your capacity grows. And so I would exactly say what you said, don't go crazy first. And for some people, it's worth saying, for some people, the much scarier thing would be nephew down the road or colleague that I've worked with for 10 years. And for other people, chief exec of the biggest performance training company in the world would be easier and some it would be harder, right? And we're all different. So no judgment on any of those things. So it will get easier. One at a time is the other one. Like start with the least terrifying. Now it probably will be a bit terrifying because lots of us have these stories and I definitely have and still do, right? There is still like I'm, because I believe in this stuff, I'm thinking about business development at the moment. I'm thinking about the flywheel and I've been noticing there's like a couple of people that I know that I think there's an invitation that I could make and it wouldn't be to work with them, but it's because their networks are really interesting. So I could reach out to them and say, let's do coaching, not because you become a client, but because it'll make it much easier for you to refer people to me. Just like, we'll just need 90 minutes sometime. Yeah. But there's some stuff for me there about that. And I'm kind of working through it. But while I'm working through it, crucially, I'm not in inaction. So I'm looking, well, okay, there's something about those two people that is going to be valuable for me, but I'm not there yet. But who could I invite this week? And then we get back to some form of practice, knowing that in the end. So like, and then what happens is, so I had this insight with a client a while ago. We were talking about content creation, and I had this reflection for myself, really, like, isn't it interesting that when the content creation isn't a matter of life and death, you're never stuck for ideas for content. But when it does feel like a matter of life and death, then, like there's no ideas, complete scarcity. And that's what it can feel like for people. And we could talk about the mindset, the psychological stuff, potentially the evolutionary stuff that means that putting yourself out there with content creation or with an offer is very high stakes for people. If you dig into it, it tends to be existential. And that's probably because it was existential to be kicked out of a group, for most of our history. Like, I'm not an anthropologist. So again, please take that with the required amount of salt. But we have this sense. And what will change is over time is it will feel less like life and death. The move, again, is a goal work, soul work move that I've seen be really useful. So if you can make the offer as much soul work as possible, i.e. as much in and of itself, a really valuable, generous, service-based thing to do. So that might be make the invitation a gift so that even if the person says no, you've given them something. You've given them some feedback. You've given them a sense of why you'd like to spend some time with them. You've given them something that is of value, then that can often make the difference and probably makes it more likely that they accept in the first place.
I think it is important that people remember that this isn't a sales call, that your first goal from moving from connection to offering people an opportunity to experience you is not, hey, I want to get on a discovery call. This is, I want to gift my experience to you. Yeah. You could even put a price tag on that. You say, look, I'd normally would charge 500 for this. I'd like to gift it to you because I love your vibe. That can be it. Yeah. I think it's also important.
It can be, but I would say, like, again, if you can tell someone at that point, like, if you can tell someone why you love their vibe, like, there's the gift, right? Because it would be a lovely, like, you once sent one to me that was like, I can't remember even what it was, but it was kind of love your vibe, and it was great, and I remember it. And there's an opportunity to give someone that gift of, like, what is it about this person, the vibe that you love? And again, then we can think, like, okay, right, I'm offering this present, this gift, and I'm giving, and even in and of itself, the offer might be of service and value to this person. Like, that's amazing. And then the last thing just to say about all this, you get to become someone new. So courage comes first, confidence comes after, and in the middle, and through doing that is transformation. So isn't it like almost everyone, the beautiful thing about the Coaching Business Flywheel is each of these things, if you can become someone for whom it isn't life and death to do it, you can make a gift of each one. They're actually almost all things that most people, especially people with coaching-shaped businesses, would love to be like. So wouldn't you love to be able to someone who could just create really meaningful connection with somebody? Wouldn't you like to be able to just offer someone a thing that you think will be really helpful to them without it being stressful, and also be okay if they say no? Because that's what, to some extent, will happen. Like, sometimes I'm not okay with saying no. Like, I'm a human. I have mortgage to pay. It'd be nice if more people said yes to my things sometimes. But, like, we can become someone who can make these offers in a different way. And that's what you're practicing. So it's good for business, but it's usually good for people across their whole lives.
The reason I love this sales process is, and I call it a sales process because that is the net effect over time. However, that's not the experience of it. The experience of it is you're getting to put value out into the world, and enough will come back to sustain you. And as the flywheel builds, so your business grows. And as long as you're consistent in retaining your clients as much as possible, you'll experience growth. And then
in finding the ways to enable them to connect you to other people as well. Like, I think those two between them are crucial. I mean, all the lines between point on the flywheel are crucial, but the one, I mean, to be honest, the one that is the most black hole for me is I would love to have another 5 ways. Maybe you can point me at other episodes of your show, because I bet there are some 5 ways to just create the conditions for more referrals to come in. Because I think it's not that it doesn't happen for me. It's that compared to the others, I know much less why it happens. Like, when you have one client who my read on the work would be, it was good but not amazing, and they send 10 people my way, and somebody who has told me the work is life-changing doesn't seem to send anyone my way. And I think those things are really interesting. So as long as you can do that, then exactly like you said, you put this energy in, it leads to sales. But you do have to remember it's a sales process, because otherwise you miss the opportunities to say sometimes, this is how I work, this is how much it costs. And if you like, that's one that, so people have the most resistance on this, about the one that you pointed to before, and then the actually talking about the money bit. When I ask people, that's usually the 2 ones that people are most interested in becoming more comfortable with. And I am forever grateful to a coach who gave me a game that helped me really practice talking about the money bit, so that, again, it stopped being life and death, started to become service, and started to be just like, again, wouldn't it be lovely if talking about money didn't stress me out the whole time? And by practicing it in our business, we can get to that place.
There's another beautiful aspect of this, which is most people, if they don't have a process like this, their first experience of sitting down with a client is when they've just been through a sales call. And you're setting off on that coaching journey together from a very commercial place. Using a process like this allows you to experience a very gentle introduction to working with a client that migrates into a commercial arrangement quite differently. But it also allows you to sharpen your skills as a coach without that commercial constraint, without people thinking that, without the pressure on you to perform, I guess, to a large extent. And I guess this is the important thing that I want to express, and that I wish people would take away from it, that you don't want the first time you're on a call with a potential client to be the first time you've done it. Because I do implement this process personally in my business, I have had, I don't know how many calls with clients that haven't turned into business, but what happens now is if I'm on a call with somebody and they do need what I do and they do have the means and the motivation, at the end of that call, they're not going to let me go unless I tell them what that's going to look like. Because I got really, really good at doing those calls that are impactful. I don't know if I'm articulating it properly, but having those calls and early on, being able to give generously without any expectations creates the conditions for success with a client.
Yeah,
and you get really good at it.
Yeah. The other two things that happen is, the first is that thing you just said. You get better at creating insight. So crucially, if we go back to the flywheel, that's the bit that we're mostly in service. I think that's the thing that if you don't do it, you can't create a coaching business. And if you do enough of it, you almost can't help but. In that part, you get really practiced. And again, this is the kind of thing that people love. You get to practice. How do I really serve this person and help them create some insight that's useful for them and they can take action on? So you get to practice that. The other thing to say is, and this is one of the reasons why I was so early in my business changed it. I got sick of doing these things where it was a sales call. Like I used to call it a consultation, and I didn't get to coach the person. So there were all these people that they were really interesting, but for some reason they didn't end up working with me because it wasn't that it was an unsuccessful sales process, but there was this whole set of people, I can't remember what it was at the time. It was early days. So let's say half of them, which is probably better than my numbers broadly speaking. I think, 1 to 3, 1 to 4 is roughly, just for people, I think that's useful to know sometimes. So 3 or 4 prospective clients to 1. And that's partly because of the way I work and the kind of money involved and that kind of thing. But there were all these people that I never got a chance to coach. And that just felt sad. And there was 2 reasons it felt sad. One is I really wanted the chance to work with them and I thought it might help. And the other is it was much less likely someone was going to make a referral to me based on a consultation or a sales call. But if they'd had an actual experience of coaching, then and this is why when people look on the flywheel on the coachesjourney.com, they'll see an arrow from create insight to connect with people. And that's because when you create insight for people, and we're talking about this in most of this conversation in a very specific way. We're talking about gifting people an experience of working with us, but it's equally true of this show, right? If we in this show can help somebody listening create insight, it makes it much more likely that they then share this episode with somebody else who they think that might be useful for. And then that person is being offered, even without us being there, a chance to experience Robbie and Bob that little bit more. And again, we're back in the flywheel.
So there's another important aspect to this, which I had never really considered until I started implementing it. And you probably will recognize this as well, that most of us in our business, if we don't have a very intentional process like this, get our clients essentially by accident. We're not really involved in curating the people that come to us. The thing that I enjoy most about this methodology is I get to choose who I'm essentially connecting with, who I'm giving value to, and subsequently who turns into a client. So my sense of well-being in my business is transformed because I'm generally only working with people that I really like. And that's really important. I don't necessarily want to dwell on that, but the one area that maybe does make sense talking about a little bit is, and there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, coming back to this, letting people experience working with you. A lot of people from a traditional sales perspective might be looking at this in terms of, well, I need to deliver my coaching. I think what's a much healthier way to think about that first opportunity to work with you is that it's a co-created experience. That a good coaching experience, and again, coaching is just a slice of what I do, but it's something that people have to bring a lot to as well. And when you understand this, it takes a lot of the pressure off on you to come in and give the coaching to somebody. What can we create together? And if they're an active participant in this, it takes a lot of pressure off you, perhaps as somebody that's maybe not experienced working in this way. I don't know what your perspective on that is.
Yeah, and again, it's a little bit, it's got echoes of what I was saying before about soul work and goal work. It's like if we're really in it, if we're really selling, if we're really only focused on the person becoming a client, then it's like I need to not only just, it's on me to do my thing, but I need to make it happen. And that's, again, in my experience, not conducive really to people having a great experience. And also it's just not really how I want to do business. And I found it to be more effective to really get out of the way at that point. Partly because I feel like, so for me, that's the point at which I'm doing the thing that you just talked about, which is curating my business, right? So like I I think that this kind of the flywheel, I do think about who I'm connecting with. I do think about if I'm making invitations, I think about that carefully. But actually, the place where for me, the curation of my clients happens is in that time when we really get to know each other. We're really in a joint process, the way I work, of, okay, it could be that even if someone's reached out saying, I want to do coaching, what I say is, well, let's meet. And our aim will be from that conversation to get to a point where both of us think us two working together is exactly the right thing for both of us right now, or not. And there's any number of permutations of that. And that, again, gets into this really lovely place where we just get to be curious together. And instead of having the thing that some people are stealing themselves for, which is, I'm probably going to get sold at in this conversation, and therefore I'm already stealing myself to push back against that, we get to look at this problem together and think together, okay, is coaching the right thing? Is Robbie the right coach? Is now the right time? And at that point, every time I compromise myself in that, which is usually when I want to have more clients in my business because of financial reasons or something like that, like every time I say yes to a kind of 6 out of 10, instead of somebody where it's 10 out of 10, I know I'll be doing my best work and they'll get an amazing time, then the energy in my business is really different. And so again, that kind of well-being kind of thing that you were talking about really shows up there for me.
So Robbie, the one thing we haven't spoken about really yet is the coach's journey and what you're doing with coaches. I need to bring things to an end. So for the listener who may have a coaching shaped aspect to their business, what does working with you look like?
Yeah, it's funny. And it's funny, Bob, partly because I love these conversations, but it is only a part of my business, which is really interesting. And we've talked a bit about that offline. But I do love this work with coaches. I think people who have coaching shaped businesses, they've just got a really important role to play. So in terms of the coach's journey, there's a whole load of ways to experience me more if we think about the flywheel, now that listeners connected with me, right? If you go to thecoachesjourney.com, there's the ebook, An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel that you talked about. There's a whole, probably I can't remember, as we're speaking, probably 70 or 80 podcast episodes, and they're mostly 2-hour epics. So there's plenty of content there for people. There's short practical videos on the nuts and bolts of running these businesses, on how I actually do things in meetings, and there's articles that people might find really useful too. There's loads of that at thecoachesjourney.com. And then if people are interested in working with me more, I do a max couple at a time of one-to-one engagement with coaches, but mostly where I send people is my group coaching program for coaches, which is called the Coaches Journey Community. And the reason I send people there is, it's kind of financially better value for most clients, even if you want some one-to-one time with me, because if you become a full member, there's a few membership levels, and if you become a full member, you get some one-to-one time with me and can buy some more at a discounted rate. But mostly it's because my experience of learning about growing a coaching business is that it's best done in a group. Because if you imagine being a member of the community for 6 months, then you get to learn about everything that everyone in that community comes across in those 6 months. So you actually, from 6 months, get to come across most of the challenges that a coach will come across in their business, and hear other people or get a chance to work through it yourself. Whereas if it's just you one-to-one, it might take 12 months or 2 years, right, to come across all of those challenges. And so you leave a group experience like the Coach's Journey Community, feeling really tooled up for everything that a coaching business might throw at you. And
I need to ask you the one question I ask everyone. What is the one thing you do now that you wish you started 5 years ago? I nearly forgot my own question there.
Yeah, it's funny that I'm speaking to you about this, I think, Bob, but I think this would be true even if I wasn't. So there's a guy called Toku McCree who I had on my podcast. I've had him on the Coach's Journey a couple of times. Really interesting thinker about these same kind of things we've been talking about in this conversation. And in the email to me, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, in an email to me a couple of weeks ago, he made this great distinction that there are a couple of ways to approach something like a coaching shaped business. There's the kind of hunter approach, which is in a way what we've been talking about, getting really proactive, reaching out. But there's also the cultivator, the farmer approach. I think that early on, getting too obsessed with the cultivator approach is kind of resistance. It's actually, you're much better off if you want clients, just putting your energy into, in my view, that bit. Offer some people a chance to experience you more. Do that as much as possible. You've got loads of network to work on. And most of the stuff about cultivating, which might be building up a social media following or a body of work, that is mostly resistance in the early days. There's more effective things you could do. But the thing that I wish I'd been doing, it would be the 80-20 on that, right? Which is, so I've been blogging with using the 12-minute method for, since 2016. since August 2016. So depending on when this comes out, kind of, what will that be? 8 years, something like that. And that's a lot of blogging. And it was impossible to subscribe to that blog until 7 years in.
Oh.
And like, that would have just been partly it was like the literal practical platforms that I was using didn't make it easy. But that is a thing that I just wish I'd done. And of course, to sprinkle a cherry on top would have been making some kind of incentive that would have dragged more people in. Because it would be, it was really my own resistance that stopped that. It was like, okay, well, people can find it. And I did have ways for people to sign up to mailing lists and get that kind of thing. But people who love that blog could have read way more of it than otherwise if I had done that tiny bit of cultivating, tiny bit more. I was doing some. Like I'm good on my resistance, but that would have been a thing that if I could go back and talk myself into knowing that people would want to do that and it'd be useful in 5 years, I'd definitely do that.
That's a really good answer. Robbie, I am really grateful for your time. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Total pleasure.
And for you at home, that does bring us to the end of another episode. If you did enjoy the show, then I would welcome you to leave a 5-star review. 5-star review, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you did enjoy the show, you will love the Personal Brand Business Roadmap. It's everything you need to start, scale, or fix your expert business. Just visit amplifyme.agency, welcome that pop-up, and grab your copy. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Robbie, and see you next week.